I'm Shar Banerjee, and this is Books That Built Me. I'm an ex-executive turned to leadership coach, specializing in people managers. My job is to get people out of their manager headspace and into their leadership growth space. I typically work with clients to build leadership DNA and self-leadership muscles in either group programs or one-to-one coaching. But on this show, we're going to dive deep into the stories of other leaders. And it all starts with a book that they believe has fueled their passion, influenced their decisions, and turned book lessons into life lessons. Welcome to Books That Built Me. Today, I'm in conversation with David Priemer, and in today's episode, we discuss this book right here. Yes, 50 scientifically proven ways to be persuasive. I'm so glad you could join us. Here we go. Okay, so why don't you walk us through what it is that you do in this world, David?
Oh my gosh, that's like the hardest question people have to answer. But no, I'll do a good job. You know, it's funny.
Okay.
So I say to you, Shar, my friend, I say, I'm the founder and chief sales scientist of Cerebral Selling. So I help teach the art and science of modern selling in a way that's super effective, human, and makes you not feel gross when you execute it. But I will tell you like a quick funny story. I was on vacation recently, and a stranger who I was kind of talking to, we realized we were both from Toronto, says, hey, David, what do you do? And I started by saying, okay, I'm going to tell you, but you got to promise not to hate me. I'm not a bad person, right? And then now he's leaning in, and I said, so I train salespeople and leaders at high growth technology companies, and it was like a good lead in, right? I said, maybe one day in the future, my dream, Shar, is that I don't have to preface what I do with a disclaimer. Like ER doctors don't do that, but that's what we do. But it was a great lesson of like, when someone asks you what you do, you got to draw them in somehow. Yeah. So yes, that's what I do.
This is so funny because this is a learning that I picked up from Seth Godin, who always says that in any interaction, the goal, the desire that you have is to release the tension, i.e. answer the question or get to it. Like you have all of this bubbling information that wants to come out. But the secret to really great sales and marketing is to keep the tension alive. And so what you're doing in that, hey, you got to promise me you're not going to hate me.
Yeah. And then it's like, oh my gosh.
Is you're like pulling on that tension. And 100%. Then that causes people to lean in. So it's genius. It's great.
That's what I do. No, it's great to be with you.
Amazing. Okay. So this is the book that we're talking about today. It's called yes, with an exclamation point and big yes at that, since we're talking about book covers. Yes, very emphatic. 50 scientifically proven ways to be persuasive. This was the book that you said really just changed the way that you are with the work that you do and the trainings that you bring to people. So can you walk us through why it was this book? Like what about this book?
Yeah, well, so I was given this book. So I didn't go out and kind of source it, but at my third startup, we ended up being acquired by Salesforce a few years later. And this is like a little bit of the backstory. So our office, we ended up sharing with one of our investors who was like this big philanthropist, really big into reading. He actually sponsors a bunch of scholarships at various universities and so on. And so he would always like to gift books to people. And so one day we show up at the office and he's got like a stack of, yeses. And he's like, he comes to me, he's like, Priemer, he's like, this is for you. And like, this is for the sales team. This is important. Like, you gotta read these books. And, I don't know if it was one of his favorites, but he encouraged us to read it. And I started reading it. And it was the first book for me that put sales kind of on the level of science, because until that point, so much of sales, and I talk about this in my book, is what I refer to affectionately as the Cobra Kai tactics. If you're a fan of the Karate Kid, these are just tactics that like we learn, they're passed down to us from our sensei. We don't question whether they're good or not good. And this was the first book for me as I I was a research scientist by education before I got into sales at the turn of the dot-com boom. So I love learning and I love understanding like the why, like why does this work and why does that work? And just, like that. So this was the book that started that journey. And it was, I also liked it because I'm not, as much as I read and love to read and write books, like I'm not a fast reader. So this was like 50 short chapters of like very punchy, scientifically proven ways, as they say, to be persuasive, these social science experiments that I found fascinating. So it was very easy to consume. And that's kind of opened my eyes to the world of science of selling.
Yeah. And so for people who don't know, I was in one of your trainings. And it's interesting because as I was reading this book in preparation for our conversation, there was one chapter in particular. When I read that, I thought, that was one of my biggest takeaways from one of your presentations. Yeah. And it was the word because.
Because. Yes.
Because I use that all the bloody time, all the time, even if it doesn't make sense, And so do you want to maybe walk us through what that whole thing is? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so it was funny because so when I read the book, there's a chapter, and it was called "This Single Word Will Strengthen Your Persuasion Attempts." And the word is because, and I'll tell you, and then they did all these experiments around it. But they say like because is a trigger word. Like when you think about it, and this is why I love kind of like the science of selling so much. When I use the word because in a sentence, it tells you that the thing that I'm about to say after the word because is like the rationale or explanation for the thing
Yeah.
that I said before the word because, like, oh, you need to go to bed now because it's too late, right? Or you need to get the customer's budget because otherwise we won't know if it's a fit. So
Yeah.
the rationale and the reason. And what I've since learned, above and beyond even yes, like why does this work? It's because human beings crave certainty. Like
Mm-hmm.
we need to know why things happen, and our brains are prediction machines. So we're always kind of worried about, seeing the future and why is this and why is that? That's why we always kind of catastrophize things because our brain is trying to prepare us. So when someone uses the word because in a sentence, it's like this release. It's like, oh, there's a rationale or explanation. And they do these like crazy experiments in the book where they
Yeah.
just use the word because with people to explain kind of silly things away, and it works.
Yeah.
So I started listening to the stuff, and then I taught it to my teams when I was at Salesforce. I'm like, hey, everyone, like you got to start like start using the word because. And I remember being on the sales floor, and after I did like a negotiation training for my team, I said, just start using the word because, like, oh, we can't extend your free trial because, or I can't give you a 30% discount because, and then just give them a reason. Like if it's a good reason, even better. And I remember there was a rep on the phone with a customer, and he drops the word because, and it was on the floor after I just taught this, and everyone's like quiet. And just to see like, oh my gosh, he said the word because, what's going to
Yeah.
happen? And like all of a sudden he's kind of like, he's looking, he's got his headset on, and then he kind of gives the 2 thumbs up. He's like, it worked, right? And so
Yeah.
I started building these scientific principles into like my content and approaches. And so I love the word because as it relates to handling objections, negotiating, doing discovery, asking, hey, sure, what's your budget for this project? The reason I ask is because
Right.
so powerful.
And so interesting because it ties to the concept of tension that we were talking about, even in your introduction, because you
Mm-hmm.
talked about certainty and uncertainty and how humans crave knowing. And they crave knowing because they don't like being in tension. They like when the tension's released. And so that's
Mm-hmm.
what you're serving on a silver platter is here's the reason that you can now relax because now you know what you didn't know before.
100%. And it, like
Yeah.
I said, it's like it's human, it's biochemical. Like there are back in our prehistoric days where we were hunting for deer so we could feed the village.
Yeah.
When we killed the deer and our village could now survive, like the hormones are released in your brain that tells you everything is okay for the time being.
Yeah.
And so it's like actually like a biochemical reaction. So I love all of this kind of nuance
Yeah.
around the science of selling, and this was the book that did it for me.
I love that. And I know that you use a lot of these principles in the way that you train people to think about sales differently, negotiation, wholesome negotiation, wholesome sales. What
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious more about, though, is how techniques and the scientific backdrop of this book and the lessons, how do they show up in your personal life?
Well, we always negotiate with people around us, whether it's like our kids or our spouse. So, like, it
Yeah.
shows up there.
Yeah.
Like the tone, the approach with which you say things makes a
Yeah.
big difference.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, if I'm, sometimes I can be impatient with certain things. I try to
Mm.
think fast. I'm like, kids, like, let's do this, let's do that. And my kids will sometimes like slow down, you know. Your sentiment, your words are okay, but the tone and the approach that you're using is kind of throwing us off here a little bit.
Totally.
So it absolutely shows up, every day. But I will also say that we're all in sales. This is
Yeah.
obviously it's what I do, what we do, but we're all in sales. We're all, and even if your title is not
Yeah.
sales something, we're all selling an idea, perspective. Dan Pink, in another one of my favorite, this maybe for another episode of ours,
I love
To
that
Sell
book.
is Human.
The best.
He talks about like we're just moving people from one idea to our idea to another, another position. And so we all do that in our everyday lives. So the question is like, how can we do that in a way that gets them to understand our viewpoint, that makes them feel safe?
Yeah.
Because people don't like forced
Yeah.
to do things,
Yeah.
right? And so
Yeah.
it shows up everywhere. 100%.
It's interesting because you talked about how we're all in sales, and I just want to double click on this concept because that to me is truly the definition of a conversation. One in which you engage with another person and you're not preemptively deciding the stance that you're going to take after they've spoken, right? And so truly there's a dance when there's a conversation, because you could be led to a whole different perspective if you go in with that mindset of, I'm in it and I don't know what to expect. And that's how I see this, as like a sales conversations or an exchange of ideas, perspectives, thoughts, beliefs, all of that stuff. And all too often people in leadership positions think conversation is a one-way street. I have
Mm-hmm.
information to disseminate. Please grab a seat, sit down, open up your ears, and listen to me speak. Right. And what you're suggesting is no, it's actually an exchange.
Yes. I'm not selling, I'm telling. Here's what you need to do. Or, we both come from the technology background, and all my clients are pretty much like high tech, high growth companies. And so they have these really amazing, innovative products that in a way they've kind of, and I say this in the best possible way, fallen in love with. We fall in love with our products, and a lot of the training and enablement that we do when a new sales rep comes on board is like, we're going to tell you all about our amazing product. We got 3.0 coming out. It's going to knock your socks off. And go tell the customers about how this is going to kind of change their lives. And we fire people up so much about the product, and we go out into the wild and our customers don't give a shit about the product. Like a watermelon costs $13 at Costco. Like, that's a problem, right? And so I have lots of different problems.
This is a problem that's present in your life right now, isn't
yes,
it?
that is a problem, And so, like, the fact when someone says, oh yeah, we have a platform that, like, no one cares.
Right.
About your and by the way, if you're in technology and listening to this, I was an SC, so a solution engineer for the first 8 years of my sales career, led SC teams, did 3-day long demos. Don't get me wrong, I love the product, but I found as I got more senior in my sales career and didn't have enough time to really know what all the products did, I became more effective at selling because I focused a lot more on the problem, which didn't change regardless of the product, and also just having, to your point, like, more human conversations. Tactics are one thing, but tactics need to be undetectable, right? No one wants to feel like you're putting the moves on them. And that's kind of where that human feeling conversation comes in. So the question is, how do we help people have more human conversations? This book is a great starting point that kind of helps you understand the way people think and how to just incorporate persuasive tactics in your everyday life.
In fact, I will say too, like, he says very clearly, be authentic with these things that I'm teaching you. If you bring you will be doing yourself a disservice by not giving it the respect that it deserves.
100%. Well, look, I ended up writing this article in Harvard Business before my book came out. It was called How Younger Salespeople Can Sell to Older Customers. And it speaks to a concept I talk a lot about. I call this experience asymmetry, which is when a younger, less experienced seller tries to sell to a older, more experienced buyer whose job they've never done. And that's really like most of sales. And so the analogy I often use is, when I had all these sales reps that were no short of hustle, lots of calls, lots of activity, but then no pipeline. And I would listen to their calls and I'm just like, I'm closing my eyes and, like, you know what it sounds like to me? You sound like one of my kids when you're about to hit me up for something that you think I'm going to say no to. That's what it sounds like, right? Like, I can tell that you don't believe in what you're saying. The conviction isn't there. And I get it. You've never done this before. But, like, if you're going to call me and tell me how to, like, run my business or change my life, like, you need to speak at least either from a position of authority. And if you don't have that authority, you need to manifest it and fake it. And I say that in the best possible way. Otherwise, it's not going to be a human feeling conversation. You're going to sound like a scared, subservient person who is concerned that they're not adding enough value. And so that's what happens when even us as sellers have no certainty or clarity in what we're positioning. And that's what we have to be able to manifest and find if we want to convert customers. So 100%.
Yeah. And to do that authentically is the point, because I'm thinking very clearly about a story in here or a chapter in here that says, if your name sounds like your customer's name,
yes,
right? Like a Bob or a Robert, like that initial connection is enough for trust to be there. And it's crazy because if you do a post survey of, was that an influential decision for you? And the answer is like, no, what do I care about what the person's name is? But it's insane because when he does the the actual science behind it, yes,
Yeah,
it matters. It matters deeply.
a
And so
thousand percent.
and so when we learned about that in one of the teams that I was running, when we learned about that, we were like, oh my God, let's make it all about the connection, right? Like, what's your mom's name? What's your dad? Like, and the thing is that when it works, when it's real, those are the calls that sound. And like you talked about closing your eyes and listening for something. I do that too. And I listen for energy. And it's crazy because when it's authentic, the energy is through the roof, right? It's like there's no way you could fake this. It's so real to you. And so I just wanted to just double click on that it has to be authentic for it to truly resonate.
100%. Well, it's funny. I literally last Friday, so a few days ago, had a conversation with a customer who has the same name as my father.
Yeah.
And of course, like I couldn't help but say, like, and he was maybe a little bit older than I was, but I couldn't help but say, like, you have the same name as my father. And I've had customers that have had the same name as one of my kids,
Yeah.
of my brother. Like, it does create this affinity, and I can't help but smile when I speak to this person, say, oh, like that's my father's name, and it does create this affinity. But it's funny when we get on a call and we don't know those things. Like can you please list your mother's name? And like, we don't do that. That would be good. It might, speed things up. But so what do we do? I think I may have asked you this at one point, but like when you get on a call with a stranger, what might be the first thing that you just chit chat about?
I think the most common thing that people chit chat about is either the weather
Yes.
or the weekend.
You can
Yeah.
stop there.
Okay.
Yes.
Right.
The weather. Like no one has failed to nail this question. Like it's always the weather. Now, why the weather? Because the weather is like a shared experience. Like
Mhm.
if we're in different cities, I'm fascinated by the fact that the weather where you are is different than me. And if we're in the same city, it's like, oh, how about this weather we're having? So the weather becomes this focal point, like almost this common ground, almost this enemy in a way that's safe. Now, what was funny was that if you in the pandemic, not to go too far into the pandemic became the enemy.
Mm.
So in the pandemic, when we got on the phone, we weren't talking about the weather. We're like, how are you? Like, is everything okay? Like, where are you? Are you locked down? Are you this? Are you that?
Yeah.
So that's how we form that common ground. But then as the conversation continues, if we find, and that's why it's so important before we reach out to someone. Now, I can't figure out what Char's mother's name is, on the internet if she's a stranger.
Yeah.
But there might be some things I can find out from her, public profiles on LinkedIn. Where did she go to school? Even if I'll tell you, like one of the best connections I ever formed with someone, he was from a small college town in California called San Luis Obispo.
Yeah.
And I was only there once in like 2004. I was on a road trip with my wife and we stopped there because there was this crazy, hotel in San Luis Obispo. Anyways, so I noticed on his profile that he was from there. So I'm like, oh, hey, you must get this all the time. But do you know this? It was called the Madonna Inn. Do you know the Madonna Inn? He's like, oh my gosh. And then we're strangers. Okay. He sends me a picture on LinkedIn of him and his girlfriend there for Valentine's Day, like the week before. He's like, I went with my girlfriend there for Valentine's Day. And now we're best friends. We're not best friends, but like he's showing me pictures of his girlfriend at this place. And it was just one place that I happened to be, all these years ago. Because that's what people, and it was authentic. It was so true, right? But like that authenticity is so important. The trick is like, how do we find that? Sometimes
How do we find it?
it's
Yeah.
automatic, and sometimes we have to dig a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. And connection. Like the value of connection is so real here. Like people behind the products, behind the services, behind whatever it is that you're doing business with, it's the person. Like the person is truly looking for engagement, connection, community. All of those things are actually so central to our being. And we have all of these layers that we've placed on top to say, no, we have to, like suit and tie and like, oh, here's my presentation. But no, behind it all, we're just humans looking to be seen and wanting that connection for ourselves and for others.
100%.
So if
Oh
we
my
can
gosh.
enable that, then yes, like in the biggest possible way, right?
And sometimes, this is like the craziest story of similarity. Last week, again, talking to a fellow complete stranger. He read my book. He saw a post. He reached out. Hey, David, I might be looking for training for my team. And he gets on the Zoom and he's in his car. He's like, I'm just pulling into like a customer meeting. So don't worry, I'm going to sit here in the parking lot for half an hour. We're going to talk. But he had his phone like, stuck onto his dashboard and he's talking to me.
Right.
And I recognized the car that it was because I have the same car.
Right.
And it was not a car that you would, typically. And I'm like, are you driving that car?
Yeah.
He's like, oh my gosh, how do you, he's like, do you have a 2023, whatever? I'm like, I have a 2021 and I have a 2024 on order. He's like, he literally said, that's all I need to know about you. He's like, that's it. He's like,
so funny.
and now we're best friends, like,
that's so funny.
Isn't that weird?
Yeah. Yeah.
We don't know anything. Anyways, it's amazing. And it is even more interesting. There was a client I was speaking to this morning, and one of their head of sales enablement, their last name is Sellers. And we were kind of having this discussion with the team. Like, isn't that funny that she ended up in sales enablement with like a last name?
It's not funny because that's a thing in the book.
It's a thing in the book.
It's a thing in the book. Yeah.
That's what I was talking about. It's like there's an inordinate number of people who are dentists whose name are Dennis.
Yeah.
And then people whose name are Florence that live in Florida.
Yeah.
I know Jerry Seinfeld makes this joke about when you name a baby Jeeves, it's like there's only one profession that this person's gonna, end up in. Like, why would you name a baby Jeeves? But like, there's a lot to be, said, and I think Malcolm Gladwell talks about this in his book as well. Like, names tend to, help people gravitate towards one thing or another. But I love this, like, Dennis and dentist and Florence and Florida.
Crazy, right?
Crazy. Yeah.
And even to the point of like the first letter of your name, if it matches with the person that you're speaking to, there's connection there too. Like, crazy.
Yes. Yeah. Oh yeah. No, it's bonkers. But this is all the kind of stuff like, and I talk about this in my content as well. A lot of times we don't stop to think. We just take these things for granted because no one pointed out, hey, did you realize that, like, if A, B, and C, that like there's a strange affinity? We are often like slaves just to like our emotions, and for a good reason, because it consumes calories to think too much.
Yeah.
And so we use things like, snap judgments or even stereotypes to shorten the decisions that we make. Oh, dark alley, shouldn't walk down there. Maybe it'll help me stay safe. But if we kind of peel back the layers and look at some of the evidence behind how people act and behave, we can actually, it's kind of ironic, by picking this apart, we can actually be more authentic in our relationships because we can start looking for these things, right? Yeah. And in a way, when especially for me, I talk about sales, like, people are good people, like even bad salespeople. Like, if I ask you to picture like a bad salesperson, most bad salespeople are not bad people. Mm-hmm. Like, they're good, they're good people. They have friends, they have kids, the people who love them. But they just go out and they execute these tactics because someone said that they should,
right?
Even though they might feel conflicted or gross about doing it, because they like, well, that's what we've done. There's no other way.
Yeah.
And so once you learn the pathways, and again, this book was huge in terms of that, the pathways by which human beings make decisions and how to create affinity.
Yeah.
You can actually unleash your own, authenticity in a way that doesn't make you feel gross, that helps you form that human connection. So it's so powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. This was a fun book. I actually, because there's 50 lessons. It's, you talked about, you take it slow, right? Like, you read a chapter at a time, you kind of let it sink in.
Yeah.
I write in my book. I don't know if you do that, but I don't care about writing in my book. Like, I enjoy that. But I have like these little,
wow.
Yeah. So I have a one-liner to remind myself of what each of the 50 tactics are. And some of them, like, I know them quite well. So I just have like one or two words just to jog my memory. But others are ones that I've never really thought about before.
Yeah.
And it's just so helpful to, I have a science background just like you. So it is so helpful to know that it is based in true science and it's not an anecdote. It's not somebody's opinion. It's proven, right? Like, they've tested it.
Yes.
And it just informs you as well on how you want to show up and why it matters to you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So
100%.
Great book.
Yeah. No, like I said, it's still, I still come back to it because it's 50 short chapters. So there's actually quite a lot of learning. Sometimes you read a whole book, and you're like, okay, there's like 3 things I took away from it, which is not bad.
That's great. Yeah.
But like, this is like
50.
It's compartmentalized them for you. So like, it's so easy, right? And the chapters are like, if you're, I get no commission. And by the way, like because I love this so much, when people started my sales teams, both when I was at Salesforce and the company afterwards, like, I bought stacks of these and I kept them at my desk for just anyone to take, and
That's great.
and they were very popular. So I encourage you and all people reading out there, if there's a book that built you or influenced you,
Yeah.
then, and you want to share that message, and like buy copies of it and share it with
Yeah.
people. Like
Yeah.
if you make it easy, people will
Yeah.
consume it. 100%.
I just interviewed somebody who loves a book so much. I won't tell you which book it is. You're just going to have to listen, some mystery.
Yes.
But he has purchased over 150 copies for friends and family. Like whoever he meets, it's like, you get this book, you get this book, you get this book, because it's just changed his life. And he's
Yeah.
like, there has to be more books like that grow you throughout your life, right? Because this book, you picked it up and you talked about the genesis of this book and where it kind of but it sounds like it's just stayed with you for years and
Hmm.
years and years on end. And I feel like that's kind of what happens with these lessons, is that they grow, they mature with our maturity too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you reread them. It's kind of like movies that you kind of rewatch and you notice a
Yeah.
different part of it. Like, oh, I never
Totally.
noticed that. Or like, when I growing up, so I was born in 1975. So growing up in the 80s, I loved like the 80s movies. But
Yeah.
then now when I watch the 80s movies, they still have some nostalgia, but then some of it is like inappropriate. Like
Yeah.
I referred to some like the 80s inappropriateness.
Yeah.
But I'm not saying like we should learn those lessons, but like every time you watch something at a different point in your
Yeah.
life, you
Yeah.
kind of pick up something that's a little bit different. And
Yeah.
so 100%, like being able to reread these books and
Mm.
keep them. That's why I have like the old bookshelf here. Like I'm not, for all you audiobook, God bless you. Like I love the
Yeah.
physical books. I love being
Same.
able to just pick it up,
Same.
flip into it.
Same.
Yeah.
I can't get behind a Kindle book. I can't get behind, like I have Audible and I will listen to books, but I have to own the book as well. So for me, it's so important to be able to like tab a book or dog ear or kind of highlight and remember the notes. Because I feel like I won't have, maybe it's just a story I've told myself, but I won't have a story to hold on to if I'm not literally holding on to a book.
Yeah, yeah. Can I tell you?
Yeah.
So my book came out 3 years ago,
Mm.
and I still go, like. Did I talk about this and Sell the Way about? Like I still reference. I use my own book as a reference because I do so many of these things and sessions and training. I don't remember, was it in the book or was it afterwards? So I'm still
Yeah.
looking up stuff in my book to
Yeah.
share with people.
Yeah.
But I think also like that's part of the reason why I ended up writing a book, because I like having books to be able to go back to
Mm.
that help me with the problem that I'm trying to figure out at the moment.
Yeah.
And a lot of the content that I've just generated over the years came from having conversations with people where they just kind of asked me something. I was like, oh, I explained this. You know what? Let me write an article about it. And after a certain point in time, I'm like, I should just have a book that has like all these things to be like that reference. And so I guess I'm having this revelation even as I'm talking to you, because I haven't talked about how I use my own book as a reference, but like I guess it's serving the purpose because I keep going back to it because it's got the collection of most of the things. Now look, it's 3 years old, so there's new stuff, but like I still go back to it, and I think that's good. I'm happy about my book now.
And what it sounds like, it's like you've also marked time, through your own book. Like you've marked time.
Yeah.
How beautiful is that?
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
it's good. I think the best books also, not to get into the book writing process, but the best books I think are the timeless ones where you can just keep coming back to them. Like even,
Absolutely.
movies, you watch Christmas Vacation every year and it's still funny, like it doesn't have, even though it's late 80s, doesn't have all the inappropriateness, but like you come back to it and it's still funny.
Yeah.
And so I like this idea of like having a book. I wanted to write a book that would
Yeah.
stay and people could come back to, and that, maybe I'm customer number one. So yeah.
Standing the test of time, for sure. So this podcast is called Books That Built Me, and this is clearly a book that has built you. What's another one that you want to leave our listeners with that has changed or built actually the David that we're talking to today?
Yeah, well, I love a couple others like Dan Pink's To Sell Is Human that I mentioned.
Great
again,
book.
like I love Dan Pink because he's not a scientist, but he does in his books get into he gets rigorous about exploring topics both from data and science. And so I love To Sell Is Human. I love the Simon Sinek books actually from a leadership perspective. I love Leaders Eat Last is actually, I know people love Start With Why. But I love Leaders Eat Last as just a leadership book because I do focus on sales leadership in my practice. Yeah. And he actually, very similar to Dan Pink, gets into like the science and physiology of what makes great leaders and why great leaders in his TED Talk, as he says, makes you feel safe. And so those are another couple of books I would recommend if you're into sales and leadership to check out.
Love it, David. Thank you. Thank you for
Yeah.
your generosity with your time and your, all the stories. Every time I talk to you, I feel like I just got a personal training session with
Oh
you
my
because you are
gosh.
you are
No, no.
rich with all of the stories, and I come alive when I hear them. So thank you for sharing that on this platform.
Oh no, it's my pleasure to join you, and I think it's great what you're doing, sharing books with the world. That
Yeah.
and not just books that built people that were about some of the most influential in their lives. I think those are the ones that can have the biggest impact on people out there. So thank you for sharing these stories.
Oh, and that's it for this episode of Books That Built Me. If you've enjoyed the episode, please take a moment to leave us a review. It really helps support what we're doing. Even a line is great. Thanks for listening, and you can always add me on your LinkedIn at Shar Banerjee. If you're dealing with a leadership challenge, I would love to hear from you and have you join our community. And of course, I will talk to you next Tuesday on a brand new episode of Books That Built Me.